In March 1945, Japan, steeped in pride and ancient traditions, continued to resist surrendering to the Allies. Unbeknownst to them, a massive storm was about to strike their homeland. From the Mariana Islands, 300 B-29 Superfortress bombers took to the skies, carrying over 500,000 napalm and petroleum jelly canisters. This mission, known as Operation Meetinghouse, marked a shift from the precision bombing tactics previously employed by the U.S. 20th Air Force. Instead of targeting specific military objectives, the focus shifted to overwhelming force, a strategy that had devastated cities like Hamburg and Dresden. As the American bombers approached, Japan's defenses were woefully unprepared. Their air force was a mere shadow of its former self, and anti-aircraft measures were insufficient. The night sky over Tokyo was soon lit by flames, and a storm of fire consumed the city. The city, with its many wooden and bamboo structures, was particularly vulnerable, and over 16 square miles were engulfed in the inferno. The event, later known as the Night of the Black Snow, caused more destruction than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, making it the most devastating bombing raid in history. The roots of this devastating attack traced back to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The United States, reeling from the damage and humiliation, was determined to retaliate. However, Japan's strategic position in the Pacific, bolstered by island bases and a strong navy, made direct retaliation difficult. Nevertheless, American military strategists devised a bold plan led by Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle. Just 132 days after Pearl Harbor, Doolittle led a mission involving 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers launched from the aircraft carrier U.S. Hornet. Their goal was to strike key Japanese cities, including Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Nagoya, before landing in China. The Doolittle raid, while causing minimal physical damage, had a profound psychological impact. It demonstrated American resolve and boosted public morale. However, the raid also provoked Japan into intensifying its efforts in the Pacific, leading to the pivotal Battle of Midway in June 1942. The Japanese sought to capture Midway Island, but were thwarted by American forces, shifting the momentum of the war. As the war progressed, American engineers developed the B-29 Superfortress, a bomber with a range of 5,592 miles, a significant improvement over the B-25. To effectively target Japan, the U.S. needed a closer base, leading to a fierce campaign to secure the Mariana Islands. After intense fighting, the islands were captured, and in October 1944, the first B-29 landed there. With Tokyo now within range, the stage was set for the devastating raids that would follow. With the Mariana Islands secured and the B-29 Superfortress in place, the United States had a critical advantage. The B-29's remarkable range allowed it to reach Japan's heartland, and the strategic focus shifted towards leveraging this new capability. The U.S. military, now with Tokyo within striking distance, was poised to escalate its bombing campaign, aiming to break Japan's will to continue the war. The early raids, however, revealed the challenges of precision bombing from high altitudes. Japan's industrial targets, scattered and often protected by adverse weather conditions, proved difficult to hit with accuracy. These limitations led to frustration among U.S. military planners who were eager for a decisive blow. The strategy of surgical strikes was gradually abandoned in favor of more aggressive tactics, culminating in the planning of Operation Meetinghouse. The bombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9, 1945, marked a turning point in the air war against Japan. The decision to switch from precision bombing to area bombing aimed at civilian and industrial centers was driven by a desire to hasten Japan's surrender by breaking both its economic infrastructure and the morale of its people. The use of incendiary bombs was particularly devastating, given the flammability of Tokyo's wooden structures. As the B-29s unleashed their fiery payloads, the results were catastrophic. The fires quickly merged into a massive conflagration, creating a firestorm that consumed everything in its path. The intense heat generated updrafts that drew in oxygen, feeding the flames and making escape nearly impossible for those caught in the inferno. The scale of destruction was unprecedented. Entire districts of Tokyo were reduced to ashes, and the loss of life was staggering. This operation, while devastating, was part of a broader strategy to bring the war to a swift conclusion. The United States, having witnessed the ferocity of Japanese resistance on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, sought to avoid a costly invasion of the Japanese mainland. The firebombing of Tokyo and subsequent raids on other cities were intended to compel Japan to surrender without the need for a full-scale invasion. Yet, despite the devastation, Japan's leadership remained defiant, clinging to the hope of a negotiated settlement or a shift in the war's fortunes. This stubbornness would ultimately lead to further escalations, including the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki later in 1945. The events set in motion by the Doolittle raid, the firebombing campaigns, and the development of the B-29 were all part of a relentless push to end the war in the Pacific, a struggle that would culminate in Japan's eventual surrender on August 15, 1945. As the sun set on the blood-soaked shores of the Pacific, the United States intensified its campaign to subdue the Empire of Japan. The Pacific War was reaching its final stages, and from the newly captured islands of Saipan and Tinian, the massive B-29 Superfortresses took to the skies. These bombers, the largest in operation during World War II, were loaded with bombs, and their pilots were resolute in their mission to bring an end to the most devastating conflict in human history. General Haywood S. Hansell, a crucial architect of strategic air power, led the 11th Bomber Command's aerial offensive beginning in November 1944. Their goal was to cripple Japan's ability to continue the war. The first target was the Musashino engine factory near Tokyo, but the results were disappointing. Precision raids proved ineffective, hindered by the powerful jet streams over Japan that dispersed the bombs, causing them to miss their targets or fail to inflict significant damage. The skies above Japan became an almost insurmountable barrier. Despite their advanced technology and range, the B-29s struggled against the harsh conditions. Time was running out, and the American leadership, including President Franklin D. Roosevelt, grew increasingly frustrated. Japan, though heavily damaged, remained unyielding, its propaganda machine vowing to fight to the last man. The mounting toll on American lives made it clear that something needed to change. General Henry H. Arnold, the chief of the U.S. Army Air Forces, was furious with the lack of success in the bombing campaign. General Hansell was relieved of his command, and Major General Curtis LeMay, known for his ruthless efficiency and innovative tactics, took over. LeMay understood the urgency and knew that the current strategy wasn't working. The precision bombing approach had failed, and a drastic change in tactics was necessary. The United States had always emphasized precision bombing, focusing on key industrial targets, but the Allies' experience in Europe suggested another approach. The area bombing campaigns over cities like Hamburg and Dresden had created devastating firestorms. LeMay, drawing from these lessons and testing conducted at the Dugway Proving Grounds in the U.S., saw the potential for incendiary bombs against Japan's wood and paper cities. In a pivotal decision, LeMay altered the strategy. The B-29s would no longer focus solely on precision strikes, but would instead become instruments of widespread destruction, aimed at forcing Japan to the negotiation table. The area strike raids over Japan began, marking the final chapter of the Pacific War. A storm of black snow was on the horizon. Japan's cities, constrained by limited land and a growing population, were densely packed. Unlike many Western cities, where industrial zones were often separate, Japanese cities had their industrial facilities interwoven with residential neighborhoods. This unique urban layout, though challenging for its residents, presented a strategic opportunity for American military planners. They realized that if Tokyo's residential areas could be set on fire, the nearby military-industrial sectors would also be engulfed in the flames. The projections were grim. Incendiary attacks on Japan's 6 major cities could devastate nearly 40% of the nation's industrial capacity, leading to the loss of approximately 7.6 million man-months of labor. Such an attack would cripple Japan's war effort. While the inevitable civilian casualties were a significant concern, it was rationalized that many of those civilians worked in the adjacent industrial sites, making their loss a blow to Japan's war machine. Preparations for this new strategy began in earnest. Experiments were conducted to perfect the incendiary bombs, with the M69 incendiaries identified as the most effective. In the Mariana Islands, activity surged as vast quantities of these bombs were stockpiled. The B-29s, already formidable, were modified to carry 4 tons of explosives. Early missions over Japan had mixed results. Some raids sparked widespread fires, while others were less successful. On January 3, Nagoya experienced a firebombing raid, but the city's firefighting units managed to contain the blaze. Despite these initial challenges, the groundwork was laid for the devastating firebombing campaign that would soon follow, culminating in the night of March 9, 1945, when Tokyo would face the full fury of the B-29s. The sense of overconfidence among the Japanese leadership grew as they underestimated the threat posed by the American bombing raids. They remained oblivious to the gathering storm, even as Major General Curtis LeMay, who bore the immense responsibility of the bombing campaign, scrutinized the initial raids. LeMay deduced that the incendiaries were being released from altitudes too high to ensure accuracy. He decided that a lower drop height would improve precision and allow the B-29s to carry even greater payloads. This decision, however, increased the risk, as flying at lower altitudes exposed the aircraft to more intense anti-aircraft fire. Despite the risks, LeMay had a strategic advantage. Intelligence reports indicated that Japan had only 2 night fighter squadrons, posing minimal threat to the B-29s. Calculating this risk, LeMay made the bold decision to remove all defensive armaments from the bombers, reducing their weight and enabling them to carry even more incendiary bombs. As the day of the raid approached, concerns about the potential civilian casualties reached LeMay. However, he remained resolute, believing that the Japanese would be unprepared for a low-altitude assault. He was acutely aware of the moral implications of his choices, once remarking, "If we lose the war, we'll be tried as war criminals." Yet LeMay did not entertain the possibility of defeat. Although many within the military grappled with the ethical dilemma of targeting a predominantly civilian population, the orders were set, and the B-29s took to the skies, their holds filled with instruments of widespread destruction. This marked a profound shift in the nature of warfare, heralding an era where destruction was not only systematic but unleashed with unprecedented ferocity. As the evening of March 8, 1945, descended, a palpable tension filled the Pacific. General Curtis LeMay directed an operation that targeted the very heart of Tokyo. The Shitamachi district, a bustling hub of working-class activity, was in the crosshairs. The B-29 crews, fully aware of the gravity of their mission, prepared to strike Tokyo's industrial core, knowing that the civilian toll would be immense, a grim testament to the complexities of modern warfare. LeMay, a seasoned military strategist, desired to personally oversee the pivotal raid. However, he was privy to the existence of a classified weapon of unparalleled power, the atomic bombs. The risk of capture and the potential disclosure of this secret were too great, so the responsibility for the raid was entrusted to Brigadier General Thomas S. Power of the 314th Bombardment Wing. By 5:00 p.m. Mariana Islands time, the airbase buzzed with activity as the roar of 300 B-29 engines filled the air, signaling the onset of a significant operation. Launching such a vast number of bombers presented immense logistical challenges, requiring meticulous coordination. It took 3 full hours to get all the aircraft airborne. As the B-29s entered Japanese airspace, initial misinterpretations led some to believe they were part of a routine drill. By the time the true nature of their mission was realized, it was too late. Shortly after midnight on March 10, the first incendiaries began to fall. Leading bombers marked an X over Tokyo, guiding the rest of the bombers to encircle the city in flames. Despite Tokyo's desperate defensive efforts, the sheer intensity of the firestorm overwhelmed the city's defenses. From above, the B-29 crews witnessed an inferno below. According to historical records, Jim Wild, a B-29 flight engineer, described it as the world beneath us was an inferno, and the heat and smoke quickly permeated our aircraft. The firestorm's thermal updrafts were so powerful that they lifted the massive aircraft by thousands of feet, only to drop them abruptly. B-29 pilot Robert Bigelow recounted the chaos of Japanese defensive measures, saying, The sky was filled with the tracers of anti-aircraft fire, intersecting in a chaotic dance. Despite the intense barrage, Bigelow and his crew remained focused on their mission. He later reflected, "The shrapnel's clatter against our wings was almost drowned out by our focus on the task at hand." After releasing their payload, Bigelow navigated his B-29 away from the burning city. Even from a distance of 150 miles, the glow from Tokyo was unmistakable. Fires raged on, consuming even the areas from which anti-aircraft fire had originated. The flames below merged into a massive growing maelstrom of destruction, with black, tarry smoke reaching up toward the stars. The tempest consumed entire city blocks within minutes. Tokyo was engulfed in an inferno of unimaginable scale. Within just 30 minutes, what had begun as scattered fires coalesced into a massive, uncontrollable blaze. The city's fire department, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster, was forced to retreat. Japanese authorities, faced with an unprecedented crisis, scrambled to facilitate a mass evacuation. The Shitamachi district, once full of life, was now at the mercy of the flames. Thousands of people perished, trapped between the advancing fire and the suffocating smoke that followed. Haruyo Nie, who had previously survived the devastation of earlier bombings on Tokyo, sensed the difference in her father's urgency on the early hours of March 10. Recognizing the imminent threat, she grabbed her emergency rucksack and fled their family spice shop in the Komedo district, accompanied by her family. As they navigated the familiar streets, it wasn't the flames that struck Nie most but the air itself, sucked into the mouth of the fire at hurricane speeds, making every breath a struggle. Taking refuge in an underground shelter, Haruyo Nie vividly recalled the chaotic atmosphere. The shelter was filled with the sounds of frantic footsteps and the cries of children. Yet, even the relative safety of the shelter couldn't keep the impending doom at bay. When they emerged from their temporary haven, they were met with a city in utter chaos, homes and landmarks reduced to smoldering cinders. The foxholes, once touted by the government as safe havens, proved futile against the advancing flames. Tokyo was enveloped in thick smoke, which obscured vision and disoriented the B-29 bombers. Some of these aircraft veered off course, inadvertently intensifying the devastation. On the ground, panic reigned supreme. In some areas, temperatures soared to an unimaginable 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, exacerbating the human toll. By the time the fires receded, aided by the expansive Nakagawa Canal, the scale of the devastation became shockingly clear. Over 100,000 individuals had perished, 1 million were injured, and another 1 million were displaced. Those who survived found themselves in a cityscape transformed into a smoldering wasteland. As survivors sought refuge in Tokyo's more affluent areas, they encountered stark contrasts between the opulence of the Japanese elite and the devastation they had just escaped. This disparity sparked a new wave of anger and disillusionment, leading to riots and unrest. Even as the fires subsided, the sky remained shrouded in a thick haze of smoke and ash. The remnants of the devastation settled like a dark, foreboding snow over Tokyo. This harrowing event would forever be etched in the memories of its survivors as the Night of the Black Snow. In the aftermath of the Tokyo firebombing, both Japanese and American media outlets downplayed the magnitude of the destruction. Each side had its own narrative to maintain, with neither fully confronting the staggering human toll. American reports highlighted the crippling blow dealt to Japanese infrastructure, framing it as a significant victory over Japan's industrial might. Conversely, Japanese news outlets focused on their defense successes, particularly the downing of B-29 bombers, while sidestepping the vast civilian suffering to project an image of unwavering resilience. At the time, the American leadership did not categorize the incendiary assault on Tokyo, which resulted in the loss of over 100,000 lives, as a war crime. Instead, it was portrayed as a strategic decision, a necessary measure to hasten the war's conclusion and protect American soldiers. Yet, even with the obliteration of vast industrial zones and the tragic loss of countless civilians, Japan's resolve remained unbroken. The nation's response was pragmatic, reallocating the remaining air squadrons from offensive operations to defensive roles and fortifying Tokyo against potential future attacks. For General Curtis LeMay, the architect of the Tokyo raid, the operation was deemed a monumental success. He believed that Japan's war capabilities had been critically compromised. The devastation of March 10 emboldened American forces, leading to subsequent raids on Tokyo in April and May that raised an area equivalent to 1.5 times the size of Manhattan. The firebombing campaign was then extended to other major cities, including Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Records indicate that even smaller towns, totaling 58 in all, were not spared. Northfield on Tinian Island, from where the B-29s took off, became the epicenter of these operations, transforming into the world's most active airport. The U.S. Army Air Force's post-war documentation bluntly stated that by June, Japan's primary industrial hubs were no longer viable targets. However, these relentless assaults did not push Japan toward capitulation. Instead, they steeled the nation's resolve. Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro, in a fervent proclamation, asserted, "We, alongside the entirety of our nation, are incensed by the American actions. We are resolutely committed to confronting and defeating this audacious foe." Japan's tenacity persisted for another 5 months until the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced them to surrender. In the years that followed, as the world grappled with the war's aftermath and its ethical implications, perspectives on the Night of the Black Snow began to shift. Activists, predominantly from Japan, advocated for its recognition as a war crime, amplifying the voices of that night's silent victims and urging the United States to issue a formal apology. To date, the U.S. government has not issued such an apology, and in official records, the Night of the Black Snow remains classified as a wartime military operation.